Myrra rubbed her eyes one more time, desperate to have the full scope of her vision back. But when she opened her eyes, there was nothing but a blur of objects she couldn't make out in front of her, as if a blindfold made from a translucent thin fabric were draped over her face. The ringing in her ears from the explosion was finally quieting, but the screams of her sister continued to echo in her head. The last thing she remembered seeing clearly were her sister's bloody hands dropping from her torn abdomen and the look of sheer terror in her eyes. The result of Brian stabbing her. The first explosion took Brian away. Part of Myrra was thankful for the second explosion taking her eyesight, because it meant she didn't have to watch Samantha die. But now that she was alone and likely surrounded by the evidence of destruction, she wished her eyes would start doing what they were supposed to do again. Myrra tried to push herself up from the ground but fell back down. She knew she was still on the beach from the feeling of sand beneath her. The sound of seagulls and waves crashing against the shore further confirmed her assessment. She stood up on wobbly legs and tried to walk forward a few steps when she tripped over something large. Fearing it was Samantha's body, she backed away before kneeling down and feeling forward with her hands. No matter how much she reached out in front of her, however, she didn't feel whatever it was she tripped over. "Looking for me?" the voice came from behind her. A man's voice. Brian. But how? Myrra turned to the voice and gasped with the feeling of something she could only imagine being the barrel of a gun pressed to her forehead. Her eyes could make out the silhouette of someone standing in the front of her. "What's going on?" Myrra said, voice trembling. "You thought I was dead, didn't you?" Brian said. "I saw you." Brian laughed. "You haven't seen anything in years, Myrra." "Years?" Myrra didn't understand what he meant. Brian removed the gun barrel from Myra's head, and Myrra fell back as Brian's foot connected with her chest. "Why did you bring you with her? She was supposed to come alone, not bring her blind sister." Myrra remembered then. Samantha was upset and came to stay with Myrra and their parents. Brian was getting more and more abusive. Myrra woke up at Samantha sneaking out of the house early in the morning. Myrra realized she could see for the first time in her life. She'd been blind her whole life, but now she could see. She followed Samantha to the beach where Brian was waiting. Brian stabbed Samantha. Then the first explosion happened. Myrra rushed onto the beach to help her sister. "You can see?" Samantha said, her eyes wide. Myrra looked down to Samantha clutching her bloody stomach. Tears filled Myra's eyes, blurring her vision. "I'm so sorry," Myrra said as Samantha collapsed to the ground. The second explosion came and Myra's vision was gone. Myrra woke up, confused, and desperate for the eyesight she'd forgotten she never had. "Where is she?" Myrra said, realizing her sister might still have a chance. Brian laughed. "About 6 feet behind you, what's left of her." Myrra swallowed the lump that formed in her throat. She wanted her sister back. Police sirens in the distance began to sound closer. Brian pressed the gun to her head again. "No one can know what really happened here, Myrra. You understand?" The blurry silhouette of Brian's face suddenly came into focus, as did the gun he was holding in her face. The return of her sight was like a thin cloth being removed from her eyes. Without thinking, Myrra swung her hand up and knocked the gun out of Brian's hand. At the same, she gave Kennard in the groin, sending him reeling back to the ground. Myrra rushed for the gun and aimed it at Brian. "You killed my sister," she said. "You can see?" Brian said, eyes wide. I've always been able to see who you are, she said. I just wish my sister had. Myra looked up. Myra looked up as police cruisers rushed onto the scene.